Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to r/Entitledpeople and r/Neighbors from Hell. In today's story, a Karen calls the cops on OP for supposedly stealing his own car, and OP then in return gets arrested. Without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, Karen accused me of stealing my own car, tricked a dumb cop into arresting me, and now my car is a wreck because he gave her the keys. I really don't care who believes this, but here is my story. I live in one of those middle of nowhere desert towns where almost everyone knows almost everyone, and it is hot as hell, but dirt cheap to buy a home or land in. And it is not uncommon for old cars to last out here, as they almost never rust and people keep fixing them. After high school, I worked my ass off at a local job to get my own place. I ended up buying a small plot of land with a trailer on it off of a local guy that decided he was gonna move to Texas. And the guy also sold me his old Ford Escort prior to that. It was an okay first car, got me around well enough, still have it too. 10 years have gone by since then, and for a while I spent a lot of my time tinkering with an old 87 Monte Carlo that I bought super cheap as it was without an engine or transmission. I loved that car as an older cousin of mine had one when I was a kid and I always wanted one of my own. I spent 2 years fixing up the one I got with help from some friends and finished it in 2019. Since the engine was missing, I dropped in a junkyard Chevy 305 V8 that was connected to a rebuilt 4-speed automatic transmission with low miles from a totaled car. Then I painted it myself inside a friend's garage with a Harbor Freight sprayer and some GM black single-stage gloss paint and buffed it to a shine. And I finished it up with some gold Monte Carlo decals and some classic moon rims I bought from the local junkyard and polished up. I also partially redid the interior by replacing the seats and put in a custom steering wheel. I'm not really a mechanic, but my friends all helped me. And online how-to videos on my smartphone really helped as well. The car was fun to drive and looked good, and I kept it in good order. That is until this mess went down. Now, I did not really trust some of the local law enforcement out here before, and this gave me even more reason not to. A lot of the cops around here are barely qualified for the job. They are practically hired with a handshake and just told to play Doom for training. Should have gone for Quake in my opinion, but anyway, granted though, many of them are really nice. The sheriff is even kind of a friend of mine, but he is really one of the only competent ones out there. Most of the rest really don't do their jobs very well, especially whenever a new one gets hired on. Like a guy that went out of his way to move to my town just to get to be a cop. In this case, he was the nephew of the sheriff. He even brought his own Crown Vic with a loudspeaker to drive around town. Let's call this guy NC for nephew cop, since he was the sheriff's nephew. NC and I didn't know each other personally yet, but I was aware of him and he was dumb as a rock and high on his own ego. He was like Barney Fife and John Cena had an illegitimate son together because he was a tall, strong-looking man that was always giving people creepy looks and patrolled on foot up and down Main Street with a clipboard in hand and a big grin on his face. He also liked to publicly flex his muscles in front of people. One Saturday morning, I took my Monte Carlo out to meet a friend, but they ended up bailing because of a last-minute issue with their girlfriend. I thought, no problem, I will just get some fast food and go home. I went to the local burger place and got a meal to go. And as I was walking out, there was a lady outside looking over my car. She was bent over in a very short skirt, and not gonna lie, I enjoyed the view. People would stop here and there to ask me about my car and where I got it. I usually don't mind talking so long as they are polite, though this woman ended up anything but. She was curvy and good looking while wearing a black mini skirt. I am guessing early to mid-30s, not really sure. I asked her if she liked my car. She stood up, took one look at me and snickered. I asked her what was so funny. To get an idea of what I looked like at the time, I was a skinny guy with a scraggly beard and was wearing a faded AC/DC t-shirt with the sleeves ripped off, along with worn out cut-off denim shorts and flip-flops. I guess she figured I was poor or something, so she was probably judging my appearance. She looked me up and down in a very obvious way and then said, "There is no way this is your car. You couldn't possibly afford something this nice." Now, I have a tendency to get sarcastic or snide when people make assumptions about me, so I said back, "Oh really, lady? The title is in my name, and these keys right here in my hand say that I am the owner too." The Karen just glared at me as I put the keys in the lock and began to open the door. I looked behind her and noticed a beige 90s Volvo with a missing headlight and had out-of-state plates on it, parked not too far from me. I put 2 and 2 together and laughed. "Let me guess, lady, that's your car over there?" She started to turn beet red. I laughed and said, "Oh, don't be ashamed. Those things aren't lookers, but they will run forever." I figured this was over, but as I was opening my car door, I suddenly felt her nails digging into my shoulder. She was screeching so loud, my ears were hurting. And before I could turn around, she kicked me between my legs from behind with a high-heeled shoe so hard I collapsed in agony. And true to my luck, NC drove right up because he had heard her screeching from down the street during his noon patrol. As soon as NC was out of his car, the Karen ran to him crying and saying that I was a carjacker that was attempting to take her new car. I wasn't looking at either of them as I was on the ground wincing in a fetal position from the pain. The next thing I heard was NC yelling, "Put your hands behind your back!" And then I was being pinned down by his knee on my spine and forcibly cuffed. I tried telling NC that I knew his uncle and can prove that I'm the real owner of the car. But he called me white trash and told me to shut up. Then he picked my keys up off the ground and actually handed them to the Karen. Then he seemed to do a hero pose while she gave me a crap-eating grin. No matter what I said, NC was not listening to me because he fully believed her. And then I had to see Karen start up my car and drive off with it. My heart sank as I watched it sail down the road with her flipping me off. Then NC dragged me back to the sheriff's office. I had hoped his uncle was in, but just my bad luck, he was out to lunch. So NC put me in the cell and told me to keep quiet. I was pissed, but I knew I wasn't gonna make my situation any better. So I just waited, and during that time NC kept giving me looks of contempt. At one time, he walked across the cell with a nightstick, grazing it against each bar like he was trying to intimidate me. At least an hour went by and the sheriff finally came through the door, nursing a big gulp. But froze the second he saw me. "OP, what are you doing here?" he asked. I was about to speak when NC jumped in and said, "I caught this low-life creep trying to steal a lady's car, so I hauled him in." That is when I finally got my chance to speak and said, "Yeah, only it was my car, the one I spent so long fixing up." NC just rolled his eyes and said not to listen to me, but the sheriff silenced him and asked for my full story. As I tried to tell it, NC was making dismissive looks and kept repeatedly interrupting until the sheriff told him to sit down and shut up. Then when I was finally able to say everything that happened, he was furious. The sheriff laid into NC, who was cowering in a chair like a little boy and saying that it indeed was my car and he stupidly gave my keys to a thief that had assaulted me. NC started frantically apologizing and trying to say he was just trying to help. But the sheriff called him an idiot that just wanted to play hero by saving a damsel in distress. And now the whole department would be in hot water for his unlawful arrest and physical assault against me. Then he finally let me out of the cell, I got some ice for my crotch and got taken home. The sheriff and NC went back to the burger restaurant, but the Karen's car was no longer there. They got the CCTV footage from the camera the restaurant had looking outside. It caught everything minus the audio. The Karen came back riding piggyback with a guy on a motorcycle over half an hour from the time she left with my car. She blew him a kiss and then drove off in her Volvo. The sheriff scrambled everyone, even NC, to try and chase her down. But they couldn't find her as she had already driven out of the county lines. Some phone calls were made to other departments to look for her. And I had to sit at home with an ice pack on my crotch all evening waiting for news on what happened. A couple days later my car was found just a few miles out of town. The Karen had broken all of the windows with what I am assuming was the tire iron and then put the car in neutral and let it coast down a deep rocky hill, which rolled it into the bottom ditch, which smashed the front end and warped the frame. It was completely totaled. I wanted to cry from the sound of metal grinding on rock as the tow truck pulled it back up. NC was there too, and he couldn't even look at me the entire time. My insurance also did not want to cover the car. So the sheriff's office was made to pay me the value of my Monte Carlo instead, since NC let it happen. Which, by the way, was only about 5 grand, though that was honestly close to what I had into it since I did almost all the work by hand with the help of friends. NC also paid me another 2,000 for my troubles and said it was most of his savings. The Karen was caught at a motel at State over some time later and arrested for soliciting prostitution and drug possession. Grand Theft Auto was just one of the many things she was charged with. I got on a video call just to see her in court and testify. She looked like a wreck the whole time because she knew she was screwed. And it was not long before she was pronounced guilty. She got 10 years behind bars with no possibility of parole. As for NC, the sheriff all but begged me not to sue him because he was his nephew and he promised his sister he would look out for the guy. I'm not a sue-happy person, so I let it go, provided NC actually takes some sort of course on how to properly do his job. And so the incident was more or less rug-swept and NC was demoted to sitting at a desk all day answering phones, and they would be docking part of his pay until every penny was paid back. He is still regulated to desk duty half of the time these days, and he still avoids me anytime I am near him. Arguably, he's a better cop now though because he mellowed out. As for me, it took some time, but with help I finally located a replacement Monte Carlo project car with a clean title. And it was the same year too. I salvaged as many parts as I could from my old one and used it all in the build. The engine and transmission were still good, and somehow so were most of the base parts. And the sheriff personally came by to help my friends and I build the new car in his downtime. It took a year, but now I've got a fresh looking Monte Carlo that just looks like my old one. You would never know they were not the same car. I've made sure to have better insurance this time around, and I'll be damned if I ever let a Karen near my car again. And guys, as many of you probably know, I'm not that much of a car guy, but I gotta say, I sort of have a fable for old American cars, especially muscle cars, but also other ones. One of the cars that I would really love to own, maybe it is because I love the movie The Punisher, but I'm not sure, is the Pontiac GTO 1969. The sound alone of these cars is just intoxicating if you ask me. Anyway, if you have watched until here, I would really appreciate it if you could post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much in advance. The next story is titled Rude to Me, Walk in the Rain. A little backstory/info, I work front desk at a hotel. Our hotel has 2 buildings. They are both the same, but one is the main building where breakfast, lobby and coffee etc. are, and we are a relatively small hotel, so we don't offer full service amenities, 24-hour maintenance, laundry, housekeeping etc. So from 6 PM to 8 AM there's just one person at the desk. Late one night it is raining and a woman walks in/half struggles with 3 big bags. I greet her and she kind of just looks at me, so I ask, checking in? In a very snarky tone, obviously. Okay, sometimes people come in asking what time X closes or where Y is or other generic questions, but I let it slide because it is not a huge deal. I ask for her name, and as I am about to check her in, she decides she needs to make a phone call right then and there. I ask for an ID and credit card, and she holds up the 1 minute sign with her finger, accompanied with a loving glare to me. Sadly, there was no one around, so I couldn't do anything but wait. However, her conversation was brief. She had to tell her friend it was raining and unsure about doing some activity tomorrow. I ask again for her ID and credit card, and she sighs and half tosses it at me. By this time I am over her. I decide to put her in the furthest room from where we are, in the second building, and in one of the worst rooms we have. Nothing major, just a connecting room facing the street. I give her info about the hotel and then where her room is. I have to go back out in the rain. Don't you have a room in this building? I had a few rooms left in the main building, but told her I unfortunately didn't. She then wanted help with her bags to her room and I again had to sadly tell her I had no one else on staff. She just glared and then shuffled back outside in the rain. 30 minutes later, I get a call that she wants an extra blanket and pillow. I smile inwardly and tell her once again I'm the only one on the property, so she will have to come to me. She asked if I could bring it, and usually when it isn't busy, I will gladly bring people items, but since I lost any desire to help her, I apologized and said I could not leave the desk. So she came in 10 minutes later, grabbed the blanket without a word and stalked off. She didn't have to walk too far since our buildings are 100 feet at most apart, but it was pouring and she definitely got some of it the few times going outside. And the next one is a bonus neighbor story. This story is about a couple that just moved in. The first day after they moved in, they called the cops on the elderly couple next door to put in a noise complaint for their TV being too loud. It was 8 PM on a Saturday and they hadn't even tried to knock on the couple's door to ask them to turn it down. They did this quite often. My mom was friends with the property manager and she told us that the dirtbags started calling her with noise complaints because the cops told them that if they called emergency services for a non-emergency again, they would be charged. So they started putting in complaints about everything. They were downstairs from us and if we so much as shifted in our beds at night, it got a complaint. That is not an exaggeration, they genuinely complained that my bed made too much noise. Complained if we got up at night to piss and that we made too much noise in the morning. They complained that our cat meowed too much, complained that people drove through our parking lot outside of quiet hours, complained that other people had lights on while they were trying to sleep, and complained that people talked to each other on the sidewalk. Also, they threatened to sue us because they said we were killing their dog. Mom fed the birds so we would have critters come up to our balcony and their dog would bark. Dog had a collapsing trachea because owners walked her with the leash on her collar and she pulled constantly, plus they'd do a hard stop on their retractable leash whenever she tried to make a break for freedom or chase a squirrel or whatever. But they said her barking at birds was what caused it, left a letter on our door about it. Mom went to go talk to them to try to work it out, found the husband first and he said he didn't think it was our responsibility and that his wife was the one who was upset. She found the wife next who told her the husband had written the letter and she didn't think it was our fault and actually she liked the birds. No lawsuit ever showed up and we kept feeding the birds. They left after 6 months and I hope they moved to a cabin in rural Alaska since that is the level of human association they wanted. Good luck putting in a noise complaint with the local moose. And guys, unfortunately we have already reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, then I would suggest you check out my endless binge watch playlist, which includes hundreds of hours of ripe Reddit content just here on YouTube. In addition guys, I do have to ask you for a favor. Lately I noticed that many of my new videos don't reach my old subscribers anymore for whatever reason, and so it would be really awesome if you could click the YouTube bell icon just to make sure that all my videos will reach you. This is especially true for people that are subscribed to my channel for longer than a year, because for some reason YouTube doesn't feel like it is necessary to always push out my subscription notices to these people as well. So thank you very much in advance and I hope you have a great day and I see you again tomorrow.